Buddy, hello. It is June 12th to be exact, and it is book study day. We are back. We are talking the book. I have to admit, I was even better this month and read it before the weekend before. Normally I read this the Saturday before. I sit outside on my deck and I read it and I put all my Post-it notes in it. But no, I read it last week. And I was very excited. I continue to love this book. I hope that the rest of you do. Vicki, did you catch up to us? Because didn't yours just come?
I did. I caught up on Friday and then yesterday.
Very good. Excellent. Excellent. So we have two chapters that we hit, chapter 5 and 6. Chapter 5, my favorite chapter, and yet so short. I was a little bummed out about that. Chapter 5, asking better questions. Chapter 6, connecting. Say to the group, what do you want to talk about? Let's go that route. I have note cards. I could ask questions, but why would I? I'll ask you. What do you want to talk about? Carolyn, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I know you watching the muting and who's
I'm watching people unmute, and I'm like, all right, there you go.
I think this is something that I'm still working on. I still have to be pretty intentional about this. I think between examples of growth questions or examples of different questions to be asking when in coaching situations, I'm good with the list, but on the fly, I'm trying to figure out how to be better. So I really loved this is Sarah's word, the why behind asking the open questions and the opinion questions. And even just the fact that man, I feel like I took notes like all over. I was like, oh, this is it. This is where I need to be. The conversational generosity. I was like, this is beautiful. I'm a sucker for terms like that. So I ended up underlining something that said, when we really want to know what others think, we communicate respect for them, and that respect greatly increases the likelihood our partners will speak freely with us. And I think that can just be used in every conversation, every interaction, when we're talking with parents, when we're talking with administrators, when we're talking with other educators, when we're talking with the students themselves. And so just trying to be cognizant of, how can I communicate respect and be willing to listen based on what questions I'm asking.
I agree with that 1,000%. And as I flip to the first chapter, the first page of that chapter, and it says in very Ted Lasso-y kind of way, be curious and not judgmental. And it made me go out and search that little video clip from season 1 of Ted Lasso, where that is basically the whole little, if you are a Ted Lasso fan, where he's playing darts with Rupert in the bar. And that's the whole conversation about people not giving him the credit that he might deserve, or thinking less of him because they don't ask questions. And I thought that was really great.
That's a beautiful clip. I'm making a mental note. That'll be one when I'm talking to other people about this. I'm swooping that idea, Mike. That's a good one.
Yeah. It's and in fact, I pulled that little clip out, and I will add that to another presentation. So now it's a little YouTube clip I will drop into presentations to talk about this. What else do we think about the questions? Since we're on the questions chapter, being very linear in our conversation, let's talk about chapter 5 first and then 6. What are other people's thoughts? What was something that grabbed you from chapter 5 that you would like to share, or you'd like to either share how you use it in your practice, or something that you're working to add to your practice or to evolve in your practice?
I was waiting to see if anyone would unmute.
You did. So you're in.
I did, but I was like, you know what? Okay, I waited. I thought I gave some respectful time. So I'm sitting outside, by the way. It's like 40 degrees out here.
I was about to, so I didn't want to derail us, but I'm like, Sarah, is it like cold at your house or something? You're in like this like little like flannelly looking vesty thing.
Yep, wearing a long sleeve shirt. I have my like winter slippers on and a blanket. Like I'm all wrapped up for today, but it's been very nice reading. So because Mike, I just finished this morning. I'm gonna full disclosure.
I'm non-judgmental now. It's okay.
I love it. I love it. So I too was very surprised that this chapter was as short as it is.
Yeah.
And for me, I think it blends really well into the next chapter too, about entering, like I wrote here, it's about having mutual respect, that we're entering the conversation with that idea of reciprocity. And for me, as I've been reading this, I'm like, oh, these like, let's look ahead, let's look back. These are great things, but I keep not doing them because of course, then I get busy.
Mhm.
So my challenge to all of you is the next book study, like ask me like, hey, Sarah, did you actually do that? Because I think that is a huge part of this, is actually slowing life down enough to really take this in and like sit with it and do the video. So a few years ago, we had an opportunity to be coached by somebody with the instructional coaching group. And part of that was taking video, and I learned so much about like, hey, I thought that went really good. And then I'd go back and watch the video and I'd be like, oh, I asked that question, or like, I totally didn't think I was saying that in a judgmental way, but like seeing how the group responded. So for me, I'm at the point in this book where I'm like, okay, I need to stop just taking it in and start actually moving to action. And I'm going to start with my family. I think that's the other takeaway is reading this book is I'm thinking not just about my work life, but about how does this apply and how do I connect with people and am I present? So those are my takeaways. The other thing I will say is like this, looking ahead, like the question, yeah, I'm blurred, so you can't see it, but it's there. It was really fun to read through some of those questions and think to some of the coaching sessions we had with Sharon. And then like immediately, like it brought back all of those feelings of like that sense of like empowerment and hope and excitement about the work that we were doing. So I think for me, it's that idea of that emotional connection and using these questions to help people feel connected and inspired to the work they're doing.
That makes a lot of sense. It's funny you say that, Sarah, about the idea of the recordings and stuff. As a result of this book, I've gone back to look at coaching sessions that I had for some projects I'm working on that we recorded just so that people could have the information, but I've never gone back and looked at. And I've gone back through them with this kind of in mind now. In fact, with one of the checklists open, kind of as I was studying it. To see where I'm at in doing this, because I look at this and I write a ton of notes, kind of like you said. I write a ton of notes and then I'm like, well, have I done any of these things yet? I mean, look at all those notes. And so it's a question of is there one or two notes I can jump into and start to initiate and do something with, and then feed some of these other ones in. It was like, kind of like what Carolyn said. Sometimes I think I write these notes to myself. If nothing else, sometimes it's a validation of something that I think I'm doing now anyway. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm doing that. And this is where it says that I'm doing that. That way I can point that out to somebody like, well, you know what I'm doing. It's obvious. This is what, no, it's never that obvious, but it's nice to see some of those things and kind of what their rationale would be for why you're doing them. I think some of these are really interesting. To Sarah's point about the family, I'll tell you, my wife is not going to be thrilled, but she won't watch this, so it's okay. She was having an issue at work and we were talking about it. And I was giving some suggestions as we were talking. I said to her, these are the kind of things I do with teams. This is what we do. And she's like, yeah, but you do that with people in education, and her company's construction. And I said to her, it really doesn't matter. I don't really care what tonnage of asphalt is. That has no impact on me at all. And actually, that's not the issue you're all having. That's not it. It's this other kind of interpersonal conversation. And that was a really fun kind of conversation to bring those two together, that personal and the professional. So that was kind of fun.
I wonder, something that you said sparked something, but I think sometimes that we're so entrenched in the work ourselves that we do end up asking questions that lead them to the answer, or like, hey, I want you to get there, so I'm going to ask it this way. And And going back to what Sarah was saying about us being coached through someone from ICG, she had no idea what we did. Like she would ask questions. She's like, I think you do something like this. I don't really know. She's familiar with education, but obviously like not the specific line of work that we are in. And so it was really great because then we would express something. She'd ask a question, we'd say it, and she was genuinely trying to understand. It wasn't that like that assumption of, oh yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And instead it was, oh, so do you mean this, this, this? And then we got to be like, well, that's kind of an issue, but then you got to dive deeper into what really the issue was, instead of just, oh, like, I don't like having this deadline, or I don't like the way that this meeting is run, or this team might not be the right team. It was really kind of like, okay, so what is that root cause? Because it is someone who's coming without as much background info. So for you with your wife,
yeah,
the asphalt tonnage is not anything I think I've ever said in my
if
life.
you're curious. I mean, I could give you information. It's really interesting.
Right.
But you know, it was not that at all. I mean, those are things, and it's funny, Carolyn, you said that about the questions. I wrote that in the little note to bring up in the group here, the types of unhelpful questions they talk about in the chapter. And the first one was exactly the one Carolyn just said, the demand question. You prompt others to give you what you want. Your question is strictly a prompt to validate whatever it was you wanted them to say.
I think that's the one I do the most. If I'm like looking at when I'm not asking helpful questions, they are unhelpful. I really try not, especially with work, try not to go towards the angry one. I'm not usually angry when we're chatting.
Yeah.
And I don't try to stump them. Right. I feel like that's something I was like, okay, I don't do that. Check. That's a good move for me. But yeah, it does kind of, and then the gotcha one, the setup one, like I try to avoid that as well. But the demand one where I'm like, hey, do you think this might be a good idea? Or, oh, what do you think about this? Or let me phrase this question so that we're thinking similarly here. And so, yeah, I think that was the one I read and I was like, ooh, that's the one I need to work on the most.
The demand question brings me back to one of our other books that we've talked about, the Everyday Instructional Strategies, and the powerless speech, Everyday Instructional Coaching, there it is. And the powerless speech conversation. That's kind of the demand one, and that powerless speech falls somewhere kind of in my mind in the same bubble. I don't know that they are, but in my mind they are. That idea of like, this would be good, wouldn't it? Like that powerless speech, that is kind of one of those demand kind of questions, where you are hoping to get them to just say yes. Be great. Yes. Okay, great. Let's move forward. But really, what did you do there? Did you really move forward at all? I don't know. I think that's an interesting one. Yeah, the unhelpful question. Yeah, I agree with you though, Carol. I look at those other ones there, the setup, kind of the gotcha question, the stump to get so that give them a question they can't answer, and the angry. I love the angry. I don't know that I've ever done this, and I felt better about myself as a person. Disguised exclamations of negative emotions. I was like, geez, that's heavy. I don't know that I could be that negative. It's pretty bad.
I think like the one maybe scenario would be like frustrated with a boss or like a supervisor or something, and they're not seeing eye to eye on what we would like to do. So I feel like, and our supervisor won't watch this either, I hope. But I think that's the only time that I can put myself in that position. But I like the fact that they brought in, a frustrated parent, because we might hear these questions and recognize, oh, all right, let's see if we can get to the root source of this, and not just the fact that they're frustrated and have had a negative experience.
Yeah, because I feel like when the minute someone gets to an angry part of that question asking, that is a broken relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That is dangerously close to broken. And so that, and it's funny that they did use the parent example. I think the closest I would compare that to would be child study team meetings that have gone awry. And suddenly that kind of feeling might come in, and talk about completely unhelpful. When has that ever been helpful to a conversation in a child study team meeting? So yeah, for sure.
The other thing, I don't necessarily think it was in chapter 5, it might have been in 6, but like how he talks about slowing life down to be a people watcher. And like to sit back essentially and see like how are people interacting. And it got me thinking too, we have an opportunity to sit in a lot of meetings that we aren't facilitating, but we're at the table. And like recognizing when some of these questions do occur, like the gotcha question, like, hey, Mike, did you do this? Okay, you didn't, so why not? Like thinking about like how the tone of that whole meeting shifts, and like now recognizing like it might have been that question that really shifted. And we're in the, I think every one of us on this call is in the field of building relationships with people and building trust. And so just like somehow having a sticky note or a reminder or something to be able to say like, that is not the type of person that I want to be. And recognizing the impact, because I think once we start getting in that pattern, it's really hard to break and to build the relationship, like you said, Mike, that you might start getting some of those angry, like tension feelings happening if we get stuck in that cycle.
I think for sure. Shannon dropped in the chat. I think it does come into play when teachers are feeling attacked by parents and admins, and admin teams need to tread lightly so that it does not appear like they are taking sides. This is critical for administrative teams to bring people to a common ground. Yeah, and I agree 1000%. Yeah, and the recognition of that. The struggle at times is that interaction, or when that happens in some kind of meeting and you are the facilitator, Sarah, is that you might not know that's where this is going, because you're as attentive as you're trying to be to the conversation. And I know we talked about this last time, being active and being in the participation, active participant in the conversation. Sometimes these things start to build, and you're right, looking back at it, you might say, ooh, that was the moment it all started to slide downhill. And then before you know it, as the facilitator, it has slid down the hill, and you are now trying to get it out and revive it. And that is kind of interesting. There is a benefit, I think, of being teammates in meetings and having that similar kind of observational viewpoint, like, oh, if I'm not seeing this, maybe you are. I'm going to give Naomi props right now in the meeting, and I don't think she'll turn her microphone on. Maybe she will. I don't think she will. Naomi's very good at that when we're in meetings together, and I'm running and just blah, 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 just talking away about something. And Naomi drops me a note in the chat just to me. She's like, hey, I just saw this happen, or this came up. And then it brings me back. So Naomi, thank you. You are very good at that. You know you want
And I
to.
think one of the questions, and I think this helps us stay away from like the gotcha and the judgmental, because to me, the second you try catching me like, oh, why didn't you do that? Like it already feels like you're judging me. Like we've all got lots going on in life, and we're all here to do better by kids. And sometimes stuff just happens. But Sharon had given us this question, and when I've asked it of teams, one, it's letting go of the control. Like I'm not coming into the meeting with my agenda, but it's on, what page is that? 103, and it's the first question. It's, given the time we have today, what is the most important thing that you and I should be talking about? And I can tell you, like, I'm a control freak. Anyone that knows me, like I like things organized and pretty, and but when I've let go of the control and asked those questions, and then just followed the conversation, one, I learned so much more about what's really happening. And then two, like when we talk about like the reciprocity and that this is a dialogue, like I get to sometimes step back, and all of a sudden the team is having this conversation and I might interject a little bit. But those are the meetings that when you look at people's nonverbals, it's so different, because they're excited. And I'm like, I leave feeling like, okay, they're going to continue that conversation beyond this meeting, versus the ones where I'm like, well, Mike, you didn't get us the proposal yet. When are you going to do that? Like, you're going to leave that meeting and be like, not going to be today.
Exactly. And it's funny, Sarah, the exact thing of what you're talking about, I pulled out of another presentation that I was doing from that book, The Coaching Habit. So I'm trying to see how these connections, Carolyn, go dig that up. Who was it, blue and yellow? Yeah. Michael Stanier, I guess that's how you say his name. Michael Bungay Stanier talks about the 7 kinds of questions. And the first one is very similar to what Sarah just said. It's called the kickstart question. What's on your mind? What do you want to talk about? And then Sarah, you automatically did this. You didn't even realize you were doing it. You went right to question 2, where you let them talk. And then it's the awe question. And what else? And what else? What else is on your mind? What else related to this? And then he talks about, after you've allowed that space for them to move through that, the third question focuses them back to the real challenge. What is the real challenge? What are we talking about? It's not tonnage of asphalt, it's this. Tonnage of asphalt is just a separate thing. My wife's going to be so happy I'm weaving in tonnage of asphalt into my conversations now. And then he continues through his questions, and his question 4 is the foundation question. What do you want? So what are you hoping that you can accomplish here? How can I help? Which is the 5th question. So what can I do to move you forward? Then it gets into the deeper weeds a bit, which I really like. On the question 6 out of the 7 is the strategic question. If you say yes to this, whatever we're talking about, what do you have to say no to? You can't say yes to everything. So how does this impact everything else? And then finally, the reflective question, which is at the end, called the learning question. What was most useful for you? And taking that time and thinking about it. And some of the questions on page 103, Sarah, have that kind of, what is your hope for? What if nothing happened? Those kinds of reflective thought questions there, I think are great. These checklists are awesome in the back of the chapters. They're so good. Really like that a lot.
I'm curious, when you guys, from the coaching perspective, when you throw out that question, I usually start a lot of my coaching conversations with the how are you feeling?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that right from the get-go will open up and kind of show you the emotional space that people are in with the problem you're trying to tackle.
Right.
And a lot of times when I go into coaching stuff, I'm there from more of a behavioral lens. I mean, I do the AT stuff, but a lot of times when people are really needing coaching, it's because they've got a student that they're really having difficulty with behavior. So you're kind of walking into emotional stuff from the get-go. Right. So I like to start there to acknowledge, kind of how they're feeling. But I feel like when I start to move into the question, and I think it's a really good question, but it's also sometimes like a showstopper, because when you ask, what do you want? Or, what do you need? What are you looking to, what are you hoping for right now? What's the one thing you're hoping is going to change? And then we'll talk about how we can help you with that. That's the point in conversations where either it like completely breaks down because somebody either starts crying or you get like the real emotion comes out. They don't know what they want. And that for me is always like a turning point of like, it gets really hard or else it's easy. And then we like kind of take off. But I'm curious to hear from you guys, how you sort of handle that moment where you can tell somebody's looking at you like, I don't know what I want. And I'm just all in my feelings right now.
Right. Oh my God, Darla, were you sitting in my kitchen when I had this conversation? So again, this is the route our conversation took with the tonnage, which again had nothing to do with the tonnage. In the conversation, it's about processes and how they as a team work together. Ultimately, that's what's happening here, is their team works poorly together. And it's frustration, anger, a little crying. There's a whole lot of stuff going on there. And that question that you asked, Darla, was exactly what I said to my wife. What would you like to see change here? And that was where she got really upset and said, nothing will change. And then then the conversation kind of stopped for a minute and it just kind of simmered. And then I tried again. I'm like, well, what if it could change? You don't think you're in a position to change it, but you are. You are in a position to perhaps affect change there. What would that look like? Ideally, what would that look like? Not whether it can or not, but I agree with you, is sometimes someone's so deep in it, they can't see a way out of it. So it's just about them sharing kind of the misery of being in it. Oh, I definitely got to make sure my wife doesn't see this conversation. But yeah, that's what we were talking about. Is that it was just, she just wanted to be in the misery of acknowledging that she was deep in it. It was also after she had worked a 10.5-hour day just to try to dig out the littlest bits so she felt better the next day. Not great, not sustainable.
But yeah, don't you feel like those are the moments where I feel like then it becomes really clear to me what my purpose is for meeting with that person? Like, was I really called in to help problem solve something, or am I really here to give some emotional support?
Yeah.
And we're actually not leaving today with any sort of plan or any sort of action item. This is just truly a relationship building moment where I came, I listened, and I didn't try to look at you and be like, well, here's how you're going to solve the problem. Because sometimes people in that moment don't want to solve it. They just
Yeah.
want to. Ugh.
And you're right. And it goes back to some of the stuff that Sarah was talking about before, is that building connections with people. That is moving it forward still.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not as obvious as you being able to jot down, our plan is to do X. Like, you didn't get there, but you did build the rapport enough that I would imagine as you continued on, you would start to see those steps forward.
Yeah, hopefully later down the line. I mean, that's where I
Exactly.
think, like, the questioning where they talked about, to me, it's about not going into any of these meetings with some sort of hidden agenda, which unfortunately I think a lot of us do a lot. And I especially see that from administrators, where it's like, what they're what they want to see come out of this meeting. And you catch on so quickly based on the questions that they're asking what that hidden agenda is. And then you've lost everybody, because everybody's just looking around like you're trying to trick us and we're smarter than you. And you just see so many mad people when that kicks in, where I'm just really trying to go into a lot of my coaching, or anytime anybody's calling me out for anything anymore. Like, I like to know a little bit before I go in, but I don't want to know too much, because I don't want to have some sort of assumption of what we're going to be doing, because I feel like more than 50% of the time it's not going in the direction I thought it was going to go in anyway.
Yeah.
And that helps to just not even come in with any preconceptions of what my purpose is going to be, because half the time it's not what I
Right.
thought.
And you have to get yourself out of your preconceived where you expected to get back to where it might actually start helping them.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I continue to think that this idea of being comfortable in asking questions becomes the best tool we have to do this moving forward. Just is, in my mind.
I think the hardest part is you have to be comfortable with not being able to help people solve their problem. And that's where sometimes I get tripped up, where I'm like, you called me out to help with something. I asked my questions. It wasn't exactly what I thought we were going to be doing. And now I'm in this vulnerable spot where I'm not really prepared to help you with what you're even asking me to help you with. And I've got to go back and now do some work to figure out. And that's, sometimes that's kind of a crappy feeling when you're seen as the expert that somebody is called in to help solve their problem. And you're like, you got to let go of some of that and be so vulnerable to look at people and say, I actually don't know any answers to that right now, but we'll figure it out.
And so Jim Knight, I don't know if you guys have read like his impact cycle book, but he talks a little bit about this too, like avoid being the advice monster. Like, even when people say like, I just want you to tell me how to do this, that's not really what they're saying. Because the second that we propose like, hey, this is what you could do to help the student, you get the, oh, well, we've tried that and it doesn't work because of this, or like, you don't know what that looks like. And so sometimes it's me just coming in saying, hey, you have expertise around the student. I'm just somebody to be an extra set of eyes and really ask some questions, and you have the answers. So we're going to figure out like, what is that best path forward? And when we do that, he talks a lot about moving from compliance, which is where I think we all walk in with this agenda and we're like, hey, by the end of this meeting, you're going to do these things, to commitment. And I think that's the beauty of that question of like, what's on your mind, or, like, hey, how do you want to use the time that we have together today? Because even in that, when you sit back and you listen, people might be like all over the board. Like and Carolyn knows this. I just had a coaching call very similar to this, where like during it, I was like, whoa, this is not what I thought this was going to be. And it was all over the place. And at the end of like just listening to the 20 minutes of, you know, a lot of stuff is happening in life, I was able to kind of say, okay, so here are some of the things that you just talked about. Is there any one of these things that you want to really dig into today and talk a little bit more about? And she was like, yep, this is what I want to talk about. Literally in a million years, you could have asked me, like, what are the 10 things you guys are going to talk about in this call? And not one of them would have been it. But it was so good because now we've built that rapport, and she also feels like they have to have their buckets filled, right? Like I have to have a full bucket in order to give to my students, in order to give to my family. And so sometimes it's just letting go of control and following the lead.
Sarah learned that Coachie's entire life story that day. That's yeah, I'm sure. I don't doubt it. That was your own proverbial tonnage of asphalt conversation, is what you just had there.
And
Sarah,
I think
what's your
yeah.
role? What do you guys do?
What's your story?
Well, so I'm an AT-AAC specialist for AltShift. It's a Michigan Department of Education grant funded initiative through the Office of Special Education. So essentially it's a big mouthful, but what Carolyn and I do is we provide training and technical support around the state of Michigan related to assistive technology. And so we do a lot of coaching. A lot of times it's with teams, and that's the other interesting thing I think as we read this book is we're coaching teams. So it's not necessarily one person. And so that takes all of what we're reading and like magnifies it times 10, because you have different personalities, and the culture of the group and how they interact with each other impacts how they come to the meeting. So it's yeah.
Is it usually administrator driven when you guys are asked to come in, or is it actual teams, teachers reaching out to you and asking?
So we work with administrators. The way Michigan is set up is districts fall into intermediate school districts. So like usually it's based by county or a couple counties together. We partner with the admin from the county to support the educators underneath. And then we're trying to build capacity. So when it comes to AAC support or assistive technology, comprehensive literacy for all, for example, we also have this opportunity where they can become course trainers. So we work more one-on-one to dive deeper into that content so that they can become the trainers for their county. That's where a lot of the coaching does come in, especially the one-on-one coaching of how you feeling, like you're going to be going out and doing these trainings yourself. How can we support you with that? Or what are the barriers that you're experiencing before you head out that way? We meet with teams. Those are more imposed by us as far as like our partnership. From if you're partnering with AltShift, we're setting these monthly meetings to check in on what the goal is and how you guys are doing to reach by the end of the year. Here's where we're hoping to be. I don't think as much. It depends on who makes up that team, I guess, is what I'll say. Depending on who's on that team, it depends how much coaching gets done. Sometimes it's pretty black and white of did you hit everything that was on the plan. But I think that Sarah and I really try to approach it from, hey, what's going on? Like you were saying earlier, Darla, what's on your mind? What can we do for this hour that we have the team together? Because we can check boxes away from the meeting. You guys we can assign things, but now that everyone's here, what do we really need to talk about?
That's interesting. Do you guys feel like when you're working with these teams, are these people that you've worked with for a very long time, or is it just kind of like year by year? Because that building the relationship piece, that's where I feel like I'm super lucky, where I'm just in one school district, and obviously people stick around for a while in my district. So that it helps so much to be able to build that relationship over time. I think it would be so challenging if you were just kind of like popping in and out of people's lives.
Yeah. Yes, Sarah and I have said that to each other a lot. Like, and that is the disadvantage we have. We have several advantages of, we know what this county is doing and this county is doing, so we can connect people. But as far as knowing what actually is happening internally, if they don't tell us, we don't know. So yeah, we do meet with those who are going through the Course Trainer Institute. So if they're becoming trainers, we do kind of get a sense of what's going on, or just depending on what's going on, sometimes the admin will reach out to say, hey, before we have this meeting, I need to fill you in on a few things. So then we're able to kind of talk things through, and we get, I feel like especially this year, we've had a lot of SOS texts or calls of like, hey, do you just have a quick minute? I just need to offload. And we're like, sure, let's chat. Because it usually does end up relating to the AT world in some way, shape, or form. We end up consulting and connecting with more consultants than we do with teachers, I would say. A few years ago, it was a lot more with teachers, but we've kind of reshifted the approach from the organization.
Interesting. All right, thanks. I mean, I knew, I guess I was getting the vibe from some of that, but I was just curious, yeah, what your daily.
But it's
interactions
interesting
were.
though, Darla, if you think about it, and the work that I did when I started working with Carolyn and Sarah both in Michigan, it was new teams every year to do this AT training. And really that means that the beginning of your connections, it matters less about solving anything. And it's just about how can we get connected? How can we foster that connection quickly, but authentically, so that we can continue to work, knowing that the clock is always ticking on that.
Yeah,
It is a
that's tricky.
school year that we have with these teams. And what does that look like to not be too much and not be too little, but just be just right, and actually have them get some positive movement as the year goes on. And everybody's positive movement looked different. But that to me always was the most interesting part, is feeling internally under the gun of the clock is ticking right away. It's like, all right, how do I find a way to make sure Sarah's team is comfortable enough with me so that we can do something going forward? How do we make sure that that sets itself up in that very first time or second time?
Yeah,
It-
before we have a partnership, usually Sarah or I will know someone from the team. So there aren't too many, we're not going in blindly with many teams, but I mean, as far as admin, I couldn't tell you most of the special ed directors here in the state. I know my teams. But I think that's the other piece of it too, is when we're doing training at these sites. So we work with the team every month, but we might be called in to actually lead a training. So building blocks to autonomous communication, for example, we went in and I did it in front of 80 educators, this entire school. I had all of their teachers and parapros and ancillary staff. And I had to say from the get-go, challenge me, like, don't take me for what I'm saying. I know a lot of information, you know, your students, let's have this conversation. And I think that approach also helped change some of the consultants and how they've been approaching it, because they were like, well, we used to come in and just say, here, do X, Y, Z, and people would abandon the tools, or they'd say, we're not going to do that. Well, because we didn't create that base layer of trust and respect from the get-go. And it's tough right now. There aren't a ton of presenters, or there are some presenters, I'll rephrase that. There are some presenters who are very much, I have this info, I know what I'm talking about, listen to me do this. And I know Sarah and I have been really intentional about not taking that approach, especially with the content and the people that we're working with. It's very vulnerable to have someone come in after they've been teaching for 20 years or 10 years or even a year, and us come in and be like, you're not doing it right, which we don't come with that approach. But if anything, it's how can we do this better? How can we support them in a different way? And it's a really sensitive topic. It's a sensitive thing to approach.
I get new graduate students 3 times a year. So, and it's all new. I mean, sometimes they repeat, but it's rare. It's usually 10 new ones every semester. And I used to do orientation at the beginning of the semester with so most of them have no idea what AAC is before they start with me. Like, they might in theory have some idea, but they've often never seen an actual iPad with an AAC app on it or a device before them. So I used to spend a lot of time in orientation being like, so this is what AAC is, and giving them sort of like, this is how to model, and like all of that kind of, and also just this is how you write the SOAP note that's a requirement for it, like those sort of logistical things. And I found myself just repeating myself constantly over the first 3 weeks of the semester until like, there's got to be a better way. So finally, about a year ago, I just like tossed everything. I put the like really important stuff that you have to know about deadlines and goals is on a 1-page Google Doc that they get in advance. I go over it, but it takes maybe 5 minutes. Most of that time is going around there, and I tell them a little bit about myself and my background. They tell me a little bit about, it's usually very small, like what do you know about AAC? It's usually not very much. So that doesn't take very long, but like, what is one thing you want to get out of this semester? Like, what's one thing you want to learn? And how can I help you do that? And most of the time it's just, I want to know more about AIDS. Like, I have never had an AIDS. Like, it's not usually, every once in a while. Like, there are 2 this semester who took the class in the spring, and so they now have clinic with me in the summer. So those 2 were a little bit more like, I want to see how this we talked in class like looks with it. So those two I have something particular, but everybody else was like, I don't really know. And then this is, and so it gets much more into, and then I just panned out the iPads and was like, here you go, because otherwise everybody's like very nervous about it. So I put them in pairs, and I was like, so, and it usually takes a little finagling because I don't have quite enough iPads for all 10 of them. And I was like, you have a client that's using TD Snap, and so do you guys share. And then you 2 have the one using LAMP, so here you go. So I kind of pair them up that way, so they get a little bit of time. And then it's just like answering, the rest of the hour is really about relationship building and getting them comfortable with the fact that there's an iPad in the session, that they've never seen this before. And I've stopped going over all of that other like detail stuff because they just didn't retain it. And then I was irritated because I had to keep repeating myself. But the other supervisors in clinic have still stuck on the like, all of the, and they complain for the first 2 or 3 weeks of the semester. Students didn't read this, students didn't do that. And like, yep, they never do. Well, I'm stopped. Like, I am no longer doing this. And it's just about it really is like, here's the super important stuff that's on a Google Doc, and I can refer you to it later. And then it's about relationship building and calming you down before you're starting. And it's gone so much better in the last year since I switched to that. And I feel like other people look at me like weird orientations are just weird, but it's working and it's less stressful for both me and them. So I keep doing that.
Vicki, it's not weird. That's exactly how I'm doing things too. And we leave our first class on AT. It's a master's semester on AT. We leave our first class not having spoken about AT at all, just talking about their experiences with technology and how it has helped them be more successful in their life. I don't think I say the word assistive technology once we've said, hey, this class is called assistive technology. I don't know that in that first class they get anything beyond that, but we have that deep conversation like that, just exactly like you're talking about. And at the end, after they've gone through all the sharing of what they've used in their lives to be more successful and technology has been, I was like, oh, that all sounds kind of like assistive technology. Cool. I'll see you for the next 15 weeks and we'll keep talking about it. And I think it's a better way. I agree with you. I also used to bang my head against the wall of going through, because that was what I was told to do.
Right.
Go through this, you go through and you go through it. No one wants to see that. I have a syllabus that's 23 pages long. I don't know why 21 pages were given to me. I don't even know it's there. It's just all the stuff that has to be there. There's a course schedule and the book that they need to read. That's it. That's all I changed.
And it's also, it's not like I'm their only professor. Like, they've got classes that they're taking that they have to go through. They have other clinical supervisors that have different, like, they're not retaining anything that I'm saying in orientation. Yeah. So let's stop pretending that they will. I've moved on.
Vicki, one of the nicest things somebody said to me, one of my students, the way that they have the master's program set up that I teach in, I'm the last class they get in their master's of special ed, which I could argue I should be like the first, but all right, whatever. I don't make the rule. I just sit there quietly in my one little space. And And I remember that this was the last class this person was taking before they graduated. And I remember her coming up on the last week and she was like, you know, she goes, I want to thank you. This is what I thought my master's program would be like. Like, oh, well, that's great. Thank you. But that sucks at the same time. That really sucks. That's unfortunate. Because it was all kind of experiences and applying that to, they were all working in the field anyway. So why not just apply it to what they're doing?
Yeah, I had 3 students last semester at the end of last semester being like, this was and they took it all their last semester too.
Yeah.
They're like, this is the most practical class I had all the 2 years that I was in here. And I was like, I
Right,
mean,
right.
thank you.
It's
but-
thanks, but
yeah.
it is interesting. Little aside, I was asked to come speak to the other adjuncts because people were constantly giving my class good grades on interaction. And so they said, would you come speak to the other adjuncts? And sure, okay. And I went to speak to the other adjuncts. I don't know that I was more than 15 minutes into my speech before someone's like, we don't do that here. And I was like, well, that's weird because I'm here and I'm doing it. So clearly some of us do it here. And then I kind of just moved to questions and waited for my half hour to be done.
My survey that we did the totally off topic, but
I know, I like that we've duplicated.
I did a study within my department on like what principles of universal design for learning professors were using, both what they thought and what the students reported. And we got some interesting results. And some of it was a lot of people aren't paying very much attention to engagement. And then they're wondering why students aren't very engaged in their classes. And it's like, well, because you're not doing anything to actually encourage that. A couple of steps you could take pretty easily, and that may change. So
It is interesting. It's funny. That is exactly the tack they asked me to take is, could you bring some conversation about how to weave universal design for learning into what you're doing as an instructor? And I said, sure. And one of the people in the group said, I don't know, the students in my classes are completely disengaged all the time. And then I got to say, which I wasn't expecting to have this glorious of a moment. I was like, well, that's weird because some of your students are some of my students. And I would say my students are quite engaged in the conversation.
That's pretty much what I've said. And I'm like, my class is an elective. So the fact that 2/3 of the students in the program choose to take my course is probably a good sign. And also that they're engaged in it. And, I have to work at that because they're not required to take my course.
Right, exactly. You have to work. Exactly. It's so true.
But yeah, it's interesting what people think they're doing versus what they're actually doing, and then not realizing the connection between.
Vicki, I saw what you did there. You brought us right back. I saw what you
I
did.
know, I was like,
You
that's
took us on a
beautiful
tangent. I went
segue.
with you and you brought us back by talking connection at the end. Well done. Go ahead, Carolyn. What do you think?
Well, I know we're running short on time, but this is something I've had crossing my brain since we started 52 minutes ago. But how do we share this information with the people who are stuck or who are fine in the way that they're approaching things? Because everyone here and everyone else who isn't here, who's part of this book study, we want to be better. We are just trying to enhance our skills and hone in on those a bit more. And we aren't trying to dominate those conversations. What do we do with the people who are? Any thoughts? Help.
I have a thought, but I know you're not going to like it because I hear Sharon saying to us, like, you can't coach people who don't want to be coached. And so like, for me, I think we start with those that want to be coached. We start with those students that want to be in our classrooms, and we let them go out and essentially be the mouthpiece of the movement, right? Like, I'm going to go back to one of my favorite TED Talks. Thanks, Mike. But we start creating like the half naked dancers, right? And they start to become like a troupe of Shirtless. I'm gonna call them shirtless just for you, Carolyn. Shirtless dancers.
If anyone here doesn't know what video she's talking about, it was the best way to describe it.
And I like that she called it a half naked person. It is a
Okay,
shirtless
well, he
dancing guy,
is.
but I
He's a
appreciate the
shirtless
half naked.
dancer,
It
but
was
he
funny.
is half naked. His top half
I mean, it was
is
funnier.
naked.
Yeah, it's definitely funnier. Either way with words, it's definitely funnier.
Yeah, but I think that's like what we're all trying to do is start a movement around like how can this look different, and it needs to look different for students, for educators, for society. And it's just starting with those that want that shift, and then like helping them recognize that you're not alone. There are other people. And I think that's what keeps calling us all back to this very call. Is like, this is our little movement here. And if we continue this in our own areas, eventually it'll be bigger. You're laughing at me. Thanks, Carolyn. I know you well enough.
She's supporting you.
I'm just gonna keep calling it half naked dancers
Half
forever.
naked. I'm
They're
going to change
people
the
at a
name of it on
concert.
my
It's like a
computer,
summer
too. I agree.
festival. They're not like
Okay, I will find, do you guys know what we're talking about? It's Derek Sivers, How to Start a Movement. See, and they're half naked dancers, right?
Half
They're half
naked
The best.
dancers.
That's the best video. It's so great for training.
See?
and-
great.
See, half naked.
And
The other,
I
the
feel
other
like-
thing I
Oh, go
always
ahead.
think about is as I like, how do I get people moving forward with this idea of helping them? Because ultimately, wouldn't it be great if we're practicing these strategies and we are finding opportunities to demonstrate to others how they could be doing it too, or how they are doing it too.
Mhm.
And so I think one of the parts that I try to be a little more in their face about in the best possible way is calling out those instances where these things are done deliberately. Like it's
I
not just
100% agree.
right, Darla. It's that
Yeah.
idea of I could sit back in a meeting and not ask a question and just let them talk and nod and do the things that it talks about in the connections part, the bids and acknowledging them and turning towards them and doing all those. But if I've never told the group that's why it's being done, it has
Mhm.
potential to look like I'm somewhat disengaged. Because, well, why isn't the guy we hired saying anything?
Mhm.
Right? Why isn't he leading the conversation? And so a lot of times it's finding pieces and little nuggets like this in this book and weaving that into those conversations as you're making those connections. Like, hey, as a team right now, what we're still doing is we're building our connection with each other. I look at this book from Jim Knight that I'm reading. Let me share with you about how we do that and hope maybe that they make the connection like, oh, that's what just happened to me in this hour. That's what happened. I was a part of that and I didn't even realize it. What do you think, Darla? It made you think something.
Well, yeah, and just going back to what you guys were saying earlier, like I sit on a team of about 7 people that do different instructional coaching, but we're all part of a team and we're overlapping so much. And I mean, quite frankly, to be honest, over the last couple of years, I feel like the requests that are coming in are being pretty pointed towards really wanting 1 or 2 of us to come out and do the coaching.
Mhm.
And that feels kind of crappy because my team's amazing. But I know that there are some traps, right? Like that hidden agenda part, or, asking certain questions because you want people to go in a certain direction, or not forming the relationship and treating it more like a business transaction are some of the pitfalls that I think, and my team has been through a lot of different like we've done cognitive coaching training. We've had a lot of intense training, but as I was thinking about, like, I want my team to come together more with some of these practices. I think I'm just going to have to be a little more straightforward and honest. And when we're having our coaching meetings and talking about what's going on out there, stopping them and saying, but I hear you saying this, but are you thinking about the relationship piece? Let's go back and talk about like our coaching practices. And if you're not getting to where you need to go, like, I think I'm just going to have to maybe be a little more honest and authentic in the moment of looking at them and saying, right, like, I think you need to be paying attention to this piece.
And a little more intentional, right?
yeah.
About how these things go. I got to admit the workbook is kind of the collection of all of the assorted checklists and stuff. Those are great ways to start. I have basically the notes in the workbook for me are like, oh, how can I share these with teams? Like, what does
Mhm.
this look like? Is it a Google form I share? Do I share it as paper? Do we talk about it as a group? Do we feed this into our interactions as a team? Like, how does that go forward? So that they recognize, because ultimately, Darla, what you want is for the members of your team to recognize spots they can do better, so that the people in your district will start asking, it doesn't matter who comes.
Yeah. I mean, I have a teammate that really, really struggled this year, and she's so good, but she's the type of person that she takes it so personally, and she gets like her feelings hurt, and she becomes really critical of herself when she doesn't think enough movement is happening with the programs and the teachers she's working with, or if they don't seek her out enough, she truly gets her feelings so hurt about it. And I don't know how many times this year, like, and I'm not like that. I mean, I'm almost on the other end of the spectrum where I'm like, you come to me, like, I'm not going to actually, there was something in here I was reading about like the persistence. I'm not a super persistent person. Like, I'm here. I feel like everybody knows I'm here if you need me, but I'm not going to keep following up with you. If I'm not getting that feedback from you, then I'm moving on to the next person. I got other stuff to do. But she is like the opposite of me, where she keeps going back to places where I'm like, they don't want you there. Like, they have made it very clear that they're not interested in what you have to offer. So why are you wasting your time with those teams? But this got me thinking about, like, I need to kind of help craft like some different ways to have that conversation with her about like not taking some of it so personally, and just understanding in the moment what people really need versus what you're hoping that they're going to like,
Yes.
you got to let that expectation go.
Yeah, that's your expectation, not theirs. And
Yeah.
so you have to align that, and you have to be able to, as Sarah said before, fill your own bucket. How do you find ways to fill your own bucket?
Right.
What are the wins you could have? One of the things they talk about is being a witness to the good. What are some of the positive things that
Yes.
happen?
Yeah.
And how can you use that both as fuel for yourself and fuel for your teams as they go forward? Look, we are doing things. And I don't know that I told the group last time, but one of the grants I have is to work with teams in the state of New Hampshire and to help them build their capacity throughout the whole school year. And at the end of the year, which we just had our kind of end of year expo, where we had vendors come in and we asked our teams to present what they did this year, like share with the group how this went. And we had one team who was very nervous that they hadn't done anything. They had, by the way, I'll give you the lead right up front. They didn't feel like they had. And so we had a conversation with them, like, but look at these things we've talked about all through the year. And they said, you're right. They're like, all right, we'll present. Great. The whole team came, they presented. Their presentation was titled something like Our AT Team, From Dummies to Divas. And I'm like, oh my God, it was the most amazing presentation I ever saw. And it was with humor and it was fun. They acknowledged where they were. They celebrated where they ended up. And it was a really good example of those little things you do throughout the year may not feel like you're moving forward, but when they looked at it at the end, like we had a conversation as they were watching it, and I hadn't seen it until they showed it at the expo. It's like, you were the team that was worried that you didn't do anything. Look at all you've done this year. And again, it goes back to, you get lost in the day-to-day. I got to go to this, and not for nothing, I'm looking at the clock and I have another meeting. So it's like, it's instantly, it's one and after another. You got to take those times to celebrate the good a little bit. And maybe it's just asking them to do that sometimes, making them really stop and think about it. But that's fun. I wish I could share their presentation. I bet I could if I asked them. I bet they'd let me share it. It was so great. It would be better if they narrated it, because it was phenomenal. So good. All right, last thoughts before we leave. We are 2 minutes after. Right, Shannon, this idea of people not recognizing even what's happening, and the team getting able to demonstrate what they did and how they've moved forward. That team will now have their bucket filled to continue to move forward now.
Well, what we would do is we would take all the data from a year-long team training and we would present it ourselves to the special ed directors because they don't go to those meetings.
Right.
And so we took, it was like 15 minutes and we said, this is how many, like we actually kept the certificates from ATIA and and it was pretty powerful when they got that recognition from their directors.
Great. That's awesome. That's awesome. I love it.
It's that connecting, building those connections.
Those connections for sure, right? Yeah, without a doubt. So very good. All right, we stayed on a little later, everybody, but it was a good conversation. All right, town hall is slowing down for the summer. We will not get back together, but we will have our book study continues on. My notes to remind myself. July 10th is the next time we will get together. We'll do chapters 7 and 8 in this book. July 10th. So it looks like it's probably the second Monday of every month. And then August 14th, we will wrap the book up. Chapter 9 and kind of what's next for you now that you read this book, how are you going to implement? What are you going to do? That's our plan as we go forward. So those are our two. Any other final thoughts before we go back to our day? I love talking about this book. Start thinking about the next book you might want to talk about as a group and bring some ideas. So I'm already kind of bummed that we're almost done with this book. So think about
Hey, like as a weird plug, Michael Bunier Stanier has another book coming out soon. I like his coaching habit and advice trap, but it's called How to Work with Almost Anyone. So I don't have my hands on. I pre-ordered it. So when I get my hands on it next month, I will
All right. That already sounds like it could be a winner. Even the title's winning me over.
Yep.
All right. I will check it out. All right. Keep it in mind. All right, everybody. Have a good rest of the week and enjoy your time. Relax a little. It's the summer. It was good seeing you all.